Being a woman in science for the better part of the 20 years of my working career, I thought it would be interesting to take the Gender in Science Implicit Bias Test. Since I have been a woman in science with plenty of interactions with women in science, my expectations at the outset was that I would not have any gender bias. After taking the online test, my data suggests a strong automatic association for males with science and females with liberal arts. As I learned through taking the IAT test, discussing personal implicit biases is a sensitive topic, since identifying and acknowledgement of implicit biases can challenge an individual's self-perception. Because I was skeptical regarding the results of my IAT test, I delved further into the literature to get a better understanding of these findings. Both McConnell and Hanges found that the IAT test does accurately reflect one's implicit biases. They also found they could precisely determine the amount of discrimination an individual would display based on the IAT scores. Blanton reanalyzed their research and found that there were too many errors regarding personal behavior when making predictions using individuals' IAT scores, and that they could not be relied on individuals' behaviors or responses. Gatewood's research cites studies of full gamut of responses to the IAT test, with some questioning the validity of the test and disregarding results, whereas others became anxious around groups they learned they had an implicit bias against. After my initial disbelief and despair regarding my results, I did come to terms with my results, understanding that early experiences did create my preconceived or implicit biases. I am in agreement with Gatewood that the IAT test, when put in perspective, is a useful tool in identifying implicit bias. We all could benefit from learning about one's implicit biases to raise our awareness regarding these issues. With the understanding we need to raise our awareness, let's discuss how implicit biases and microaggressions impacts individuals and how this can carry over into the workplace. The pervasive nature of our perceived views can direct how we interact with people around us. So let's discuss how these affect us in our daily life. Denying microaggression can lead to the justification for the majority to ignore biases against marginalized groups. Dominant ideology perpetuates the myth that any marginalized group can overcome biases if they work hard enough. Is microaggression nonsense? According to Thomas's research in 2008, microaggression is focusing solely on problems entrenching individuals in the victimization philosophy, which goes against the proven psychological fact that people need to reinforce positive aspects regarding human nature. Research by Sue in 2010 found Thomas's research is flawed because their interpretation minimizes and trivializes the impact of microaggressions and portrays minorities as weak and overly sensitive. What we can do at the individual level to limit negative effects of implicit biases and microaggressions in organizations. It is important to understand that just talking about change without any organizational support backing up this need is not going to lead to change. To effectively create a change, a genuine awareness of implicit biases and understanding why they exist is a necessity to be the catalyst for change. There is a need for continuous, active, and creative approaches to advocate for change through dialogue and educational programs. To address any bias against marginalized workers, training to address any perceived deficits is essential. For example, providing women assertiveness and negotiating training would support leader emergence by educating women to express their ideas during informal as well as formal meetings. Marginalized employees within the company should be matched with a mentor either within the organization or alternatively with other individuals of similar minority that may hold a higher level leadership role in other companies. Evaluation tools need to be instigated to fairly evaluate marginalized workers, such as providing a 360 feedback for workers within the company. Including superiors, peers, and subordinate feedback would provide a better overall background of the worker and make clear up conflicting feedback, as well as tackle subtle forms of implicit biases. What is the impact of implicit biases on organizations? Kohlberg's model of moral development states that leaders will stick with what they believe they know to be correct. Without the appropriate awareness of implicit biases, especially for those in leadership positions, the trickle-down effect on the belief system will not be addressed. Without addressing leaders' implicit biases, these biases will perpetuate the impact of hiring, promoting, or in evaluating workers. Providing leadership programs will address organizational deficits. Workshops outlining key dimensions of inclusion and psychological safety will have a high impact, especially when including leaders in the workshop. Creating psychological safety and inclusion must occur between everyone with the organization, not just those that are similar or most near to their social system. It is important to address and to continue to address any oppression to see a difference in organizations and society. Gotzi's and Cortese's research discusses the benefit from intervention programs to promote cultural awareness, and Collins and Schlepp's research supports allies following steps to assist in creating a psychologically safe, inclusive environment within the workplace. These allies gives voice to all those that are marginalized within an organization. Importantly, allies follow a cyclical approach to the steps that will continually add allies to their effort. With allies promoting constructive ways to act on our obligation to one another, a more socially conscious workplace will benefit. An aspect to include communication addressing microaggressions will create a psychologically safe, culturally aware, and supportive environment. Ongoing efforts based on these concepts will make a long-term difference in an organization. In conclusion, although the IAT test challenged my self-perception and defensiveness, I realized that if I could have implicit biases on a topic I was sure that I did not have, then most likely there are many others that also are unaware of their implicit biases to discuss and consider situations from different perspectives. Within the workplace, all stakeholders need to sincerely approach the issue as an agent of change within the workplace. The need for workers and leaders to participate in workshops addressing implicit biases and microaggressions with the understanding that we all need to continually recognize where in our lives we may be acting with bias. We all need to be allies for change, which requires a genuine awareness of our implicit biases and an understanding as to why they exist. Leading by example within an organization will have a trickle-down effect, impacting the organization's overall belief system. Eliminating negative effects of implicit bias and microaggressions is an ongoing process, as I mentioned previously, and it requires a commitment from the Human Resource Development Group, leaders, workers, and allies to create a bias and judgment-free environment through a lens of inclusion and celebrating our diversity.